Hey, welcome everybody. Welcome to another session of Lessons on Learning. A quick 10-15 minute session on how our learners learn best and how we can offer them the very best learning experiences during their training sessions. Let's get started. About 100 years ago, there was a chap called Edward Thorndike, and Edward Thorndike, way back then, came up with this principle that he called the 6 laws of learning. And even though these laws that he came up with are over 100 years old now, I think they still sound very true today, and they're still really relevant today. So in this video, we're going to go through them really quickly and share with you how you can implement them into your training sessions and what it is that makes them so relevant today. So this is going to help you to create much more impactful, much more effective learning sessions, get your learners engaged and make sure that the information that you share with them is impactful and relevant. All right, let's crack on straight away. So the first one is what Thorndike called readiness, the law of readiness. So what does that mean and how does that apply to our learnings and our classes? Well, the law of readiness simply means getting your learners ready to learn. So what it states is that nobody's really going to be able to learn unless they feel ready to learn. So in other words, they're in the right kind of mindset, they've got the right kind of outlook for it, they're well prepared, they're comfortable, they've got all their kind of things in. This is bollocks. So the first law, if you like, according to Thorndike, was what he called the law of readiness. So in other words, having your learner ready to learn. And I guess the principle behind this still sound today. No learner is going to be able to learn effectively unless they feel ready to learn. Now that could be physical, they're in a comfortable place, they're settled, they feel safe, they feel aligned. It could also be, the fact that they've got all the materials that they need, the resources, the equipment, even basic things like pens and paper and stuff like that. But also, it's also about you as an educator. Have you prepared them? Have you got them ready to learn? Have you assured them that there's something in it for them, that they're going to get benefit from it, the purpose, that it's going to resolve some issues or provide some results that's going to solve a problem? And have you kind of captured them right from the very start? Hooked them in, if you like. That's what I think he meant by making sure the first law, the first principle is ensuring that the learner has a readiness to learn. The next one, according to Thorndike's 6 laws, is the law of primacy. So what does that mean in today's learning sessions? Well, primacy is just putting first things first. So I guess it's kind of like a form of scaffolding. What does a learner need to learn first in order to be able to learn the next thing second? So is there some kind of order that you can put things in? It's better not to randomize things too much. What's the first step? What do they need to know first? Because if you can put things in some kind of order, doesn't necessarily have to be a chronological order, doesn't even necessarily have to be a logical order, but what order does it need to be in to help them get to the second step, the third step, that kind of thing. So it's about us preparing our information, preparing our lessons, and basically putting first things first. What's first things first? That's what he meant by primacy. That's what I think anyway, and that's how it translates today. All right, let's move on. The next law or principle that he talked about was the law or the principle of exercise. I'm going to put this in red because I just think it's really, really important. And by that, we don't necessarily mean exercise as in doing exercises, if you like, for health and fitness. We mean exercise as in some kind of practical application, some kind of exercise that reinforces the point that we're trying to make for our learners. Exercise means some kind of practice, Connections are strengthened through practice, whether that's physical practice, strengthening muscle memory, or even mental practice, strengthening neural connections, or a combination of both. But connections are strengthened through practice, and they are weakened through a lack of practice or a lack of application. And I think that's what he meant by exercise. So in today's lessons, in today's training sessions, how can we put our content into practice? It shouldn't all be about theory. How can we get our learners to apply some of that theory to a practical situation? Let's get on to the next one. The next one that he talked about was the law of effect. Let me just write that in there as well. Use a different color this time. The law of effect. So in other words, how does it affect our learner? How does the information or the practice or the participation affect the learner? So really this is, for me, this is about emotions and emotional connection. And teaching and learning that, they should be emotional, because the more there is an emotional connection to what we do and to what our learners perceive, the more it's embedded in memory and the more it's implemented. The biggest shifts and transformations that any of us go through usually have some kind of emotional connection. So how does it transform somebody through affect? How does it affect them physically, or affect them emotionally, or affect them mentally? So we've really got to think about our content, and rather than just simply delivering information which they could get out of a book or from a YouTube video like this, we have to create something that creates some kind of effect in them. It moves them in some way, because really good education and good learning, it has to be transformational, and I think that's what's meant by effect. And the next one that he talked about was, this sounds a bit heavy, intensity. And what does that mean? Well, whereas the other one was about emotion, an emotional connection, an emotional effect, I personally think this one is about energy. It's about energy. It's about us as educators. How much energy do we put into it? How much effort and energy? And how much effort and energy can we get from them? I also think it's about something else which is a little bit controversial as well. And for me, that is challenge. If you really want to know the secret to engagement, for me, it's down to one word. It's down to challenge. It's about challenging learners. And so I personally think it's healthy, somewhat necessary, to put learners under a little bit of pressure. And I know these days we try to avoid that. We try to avoid making learners feel uncomfortable. But if we're in the business of change, the business of transformation, it's not really possible for something to change and transform without some level of discomfort. Now, it doesn't have to be harmful, doesn't have to be really painful, certainly doesn't have to be done with bad intention. It's all done with good intention. But I think intensity refers to how much pressure are you willing and able to put your learner under, and how have you set up your learner to be willing to take that pressure and that intensity in order to change. You remember there's that old adage, isn't it, that pressure creates diamonds? I think it's pressure with a certain amount of love and care creates great transformation in students. So I think intensity refers to energy, refers to that little bit of push, that little bit of pressure, that little bit of heat that we can put learners in, but also prepare learners to take. And last but certainly not least, and these are not in any kind of particular order, of course, we've got what Thorndike talked as being recency. So what does that mean? Well, recency, I think personally, refers to like one of the laws of memory. So if you think about different laws of memory, for instance, primacy is a law of memory. What people hear first creates the strongest first impression, a lasting impression. What people hear and see last is often what they remember longest. And so when it comes to us in our, when we're delivering our education, when we're delivering our training, we have to be really mindful of what learners hear, see, experience last, because what was most recently, what happened most recently is going to kind of stay at the top of their working memory, their consciousness, and I think it's going to stay with them the longest. So again, what does that mean exactly for us as educators? Well, it means that we have to be really careful about what we put at the end of our training sessions. For instance, one of the most common mistakes that a lot of educators make is they wait until the very end to field questions and to answer questions. And the longer that goes on, the more the quality of the question diminishes. And pretty soon you're answering questions about really banal and kind of insignificant things, and all the amazing content that you've delivered gets drowned out by the last question about, hey, where did you get that really fancy pen from, or how do you make your camera switch angles like that? And suddenly you're talking about software and stationery rather than the information that you've spent so long preparing. And I also think as well, we often say something that's really important, but we might have said it right at the beginning. So recency means going back in time at the end of the class and bringing forward all the really good stuff from throughout the day or throughout the session, so that the most important points are what you reiterate or what you repeat. And those important points are the ones that are most recent in their head, or what they remember longest. So remember that what people hear last, they often remember longest. Thorndike's law of recency. Now, these laws are not in any particular order as such. They're just as I particularly went through them, but they're not really in any particular order. And so, the readiness, making sure that your learner is ready to learn, both physically and mentally. Make sure that you've hooked them and you've captured them and you've given them a really good reason to stay and to buy in. Primacy, first things first. What's the first thing that they need to know in order to successfully get onto the second thing that they need to know? Exercise, practice, practical application strengthens connections. A lack of application weakens them. So how can you get them doing the stuff that you're talking about? Effect, how does it transform them? How does it touch them emotionally, affect them emotionally, even spiritually? I don't know, it could be anything you like, but it has to be something more than just simply receiving data. Intensity, this is about energy. For me, this is about how much energy you can put into something and how much energy you can extract from your learners. And it also means, how far can you push them? A little bit of heat, a little bit of pressure, that creates transformation. Then we've got recency. Remember, what people hear last, they remember longest. So make sure you structure your information in that way so that people get the good stuff and they remember that for longer. That's Thorndike's 6 laws of learning. Not my stuff. This is all down to Edward Thorndike, but I still think it's relative to today's learning, even though he did it over 100 years ago. Listen, if you've got any take on this, any comments or opinions, make sure you drop that comment and opinion before. Make sure that you like and share this, subscribe to the channel, tell your friends about it, and hopefully I will see you again on more lessons in learning. All right, my friends, you take care. Have a good one. Bye-bye.